Hello, and welcome to this Vicon training video. This video will focus on enhancements to the Baja query language in Niagara AX 3.6 build. For the purposes of this video demonstration, I am running a station on my local PC named Building1Jace. I have several PX files and components set up to help demonstrate these enhanced features. The first feature we'll talk about is enhancements to the BQL query builder. To demonstrate this, I have a report PX file configured which has a bound table in the report PX view. And this bound table uses a BQL query to run a query against historical data in the station. For those of you familiar with the BQL syntax, you can see that I'm querying the history space, specifically this KWH history, and then using the question mark syntax followed by the period equals to today to limit the data that's returned by the query. And in the projection, I'm just returning all the available columns. Now previously the BQL query builder did not understand this syntax for specifying the period of a query run against the history space. So you had to type all this in manually in this ORD field here. Well, now the query builder has been enhanced so that it actually understands that syntax. So when we launch the BQL query builder, you'll see that now I get a time range selector under the find dialog. So I'm finding this specific KWH history, and I'm able to specify the time range that I want to use for this result set. So you can pick from all the standard time ranges that we have available, or you can use time range and click the clock icon to specify the start and end time ranges. Typically you'll probably use one of the preset time ranges like last week, week to date, yesterday, or things like that if you were building reports. So this enhancement just allows you to use the query builder instead of having to type all these things in manually in the ORD field. Very nice improvement though. Now, the next enhancement I want to talk about is a BQL Expression component. And just to demonstrate this, I have some typical wire sheet logic here shown. You can see that I have two numerical points here which are going into an add block, and that is linked into a greater than logic block which is comparing the sum of these two values to a third value. And if the sum of the first two values is greater than this value, that links into the AND block, and it compares to this Boolean here to give us a final output on the AND block. Obviously this is just some fictitious logic, but just something to demonstrate the component. So if I wanted to maybe simplify this a little bit, in Kit Control in the util folder, there's a new component here which is called a BQL Expression component that we can drag out. Now, straight out of the palette, this component really doesn't have anything to it other than there's an expression and an execution delay property. If we look at the slot sheet view, we can add slots to this component. So let's consider that we want to link all four of these logic blocks, these components, into this BQL Expression component. And normally I would mouse over these and then check the status bar to see that this output is a status Boolean or a status numeric, for example. Now with 3.6, these rules for linking components together have been relaxed, and conversion can happen on the fly. And this topic is discussed more in a different video that covers wire sheets and links specifically. So just take for granted at this point that we can link that status numeric to, say, a double slot or a Boolean slot without having to actually have the same data type or use a conversion in between. So I'm going to add some slots here real quickly, and the first one will be N1, which will be a Boolean slot, and then I'll add N2, which I will make a double. I could be using status numeric and status Boolean as well, but in this case I'm just going to go ahead and use the raw Boolean data types and the double data types. And then I'll add an out property as well that's going to be a Boolean, and we should probably set it to read only and summary. and I'll go ahead and set these other slots so that they execute on change and that they're summary slots as well. So now we can see on the wire sheet that all these slots are available on the component, and that the data types are appropriate. And this will allow me to now link, so I can link my Boolean writable into my N1 that's a Boolean, and I'll go ahead and link up the N2, N3, and N4 slots to my component as well. Now we'll go back to the property sheet view of this expression component, and we can type in syntax to represent this logic. So this is going to be more flexible than having to use lots and lots of wire sheet components to do this. So based on this expression that we have, I know I want to add N2 and N3 together. So maybe I'll go ahead and put parentheses and say N2 plus N3. I know that I want to compare the results of that, the output of the add block. I want to compare those to N4's value, and I want to see if it's greater than N4. So I can say if the sum is greater than N4. Now when it goes into the AND block, I'm trying to compare the state of this logic statement, meaning N1 and 2 is greater than N4, and I also want to make sure that N1 is also true at the same time. So we could say N1, and maybe we'll go ahead and put all this into brackets as well, so that we can group our logical evaluations here. We're saying that we want to add these two together and compare that to N4, and that'll give us a Boolean result that we want to have ANDed with the N1, and we want to send that result essentially out. The result of this logical statement here will be then represented by the out slot on the component. So now if we go back to the wire sheet here, and we know N1 is true, but N2 and 3 add up to 6, which is still less than 10. So if I go ahead and set this up to a higher value, then you can see that my output slot here, both of the AND gate and of the BQL expression, goes to a true value. And if I change maybe this Boolean back to false, then we should see that both of those outputs go to false. So the expression component will allow me to do a lot of complex logic through the use of mathematical or logic expressions as text, which can really simplify the wire sheet and allow me to do a lot of more complex math and logic statements, basically with a lot fewer components. Now, if we go to the help and select guide on target while we're looking at the BQL expression component, this will launch the help and bring up the kick control document that talks about the BQL expression component. And it tells me that they're located in the util folder and in the logic and math folder. So we've had in the logic and the math folder, you'll also find an expression logic component here, which is set up for some Booleans with an AND logic there. And also in the math, you'll see that there's a math expression one that's really simply just a sum of 4 inputs. So it's just trying to give you some things to work with there as demonstrations. If you click on the BQL expression component notes, you'll see that there's engineering notes 2 that's been added, and there's a document on BQL expression component that's located there. And this document has a lot of good details. It talks about what the expression component is and isn't, and places where you might want to use it. It goes through and talks about the order of operations, the precedence and supported operators, things like that. It talks about being able to do multiple expressions by having a comma, so you can have multiple expressions in the same component and have multiple outputs that you are setting, as well as long statements and using carriage returns and things like that. So lots of good help in the help document on this BQL expression component. Okay. Now, the last thing I wanted to talk about with BQL for regarding enhancements is something that we talk about aliasing, which is sort of specifying the column headers for the results of a BQL query. And specifically, this is an enhancement related to BQL expressions, and I'm just going to sort of stretch this property sheet out instead of trying to go into the BQL query builder, because it doesn't particularly handle expressions as well, and this might be a topic that most people aren't really aware of. But BQL, instead of doing a select statement, you can see that this is specifying a slot path, looking at this BQL alias folder under the root of the station. And instead of doing a select statement with the projection and everything, this is simply a BQL expression, which is in the curly braces. So what this is doing is saying get temp1, a point named temp1, and get its out value and display that as temp1 on the header. So you can see that it's getting a numerical value from this proxy point called temp1, and it's displaying the header as temp1. Then it says get temp2 out as temp2, so the title is temp2, and then further into the expression you can see that I'm adding those two numeric writables together, getting their values, adding them together, dividing by 2, and setting that as average as the title of the column, and then doing a logical expression here of the of two Boolean writable points, load 1 out.value or load 2, and either on is the text at the top here. So expressions were already in the BQL framework prior to 3.6, but you couldn't use alias assignments for the results on the table. So that's a new feature that was added for those BQL expressions. And so we can see that basically by overriding one of these points, maybe, and remember bound tables, which is what I'm using here, essentially don't update on their own. You have to refresh the screen, but you can see that whenever this screen would load, essentially if I change this maybe to 76 or something and then refresh, then you see that my average changed now. So the BQL expression, every time this BQL expression gets processed, it'll process all these widgets or components here, and the results get rendered, and aliasing is really the feature that was added there. So this concludes the training video on BQL enhancements. Please stay tuned for other training videos for other enhancements related to the Niagara AX 3.6 software.